Welcome to Entanglement Radio, transcendent talk for the conscious mind. Join us for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science, new thought, and conscious healing. Explore the potential and infinite possibilities of what it means to be human with some of the best guests in radio. At Entanglement Radio, it is all connected. Now, here is your host, Angela Levesque, on the OMTimes Radio Network.
To Entanglement Radio with Angela Lebec right here on iom.fm. I'm coming to you live today from the beautiful foothills of the Rocky Mountains here in Boise, Idaho. I have a great show for you. We have author William T Hathaway on, and we are talking about the subject of his book, Leela the Revolutionary. I'm quite excited. I don't get to interview many fiction writers on this program, although I do have a couple coming up in the next few months. It's always enjoyable because I do love to read fiction, but then it also just opens up the conversation, and we get to talk about hypotheticals and the way that life imitates art and all sorts of good conversation topics like that. Next week, I have NASA engineer David Gagan on, and we are lifting the veil. He wrote a book called The Endless Journey, a unique perspective on mankind's origin, purpose, and ultimate destiny. So look forward to that, another wonderful blending of science and spirituality. Last week, I let you know that my book is available. The Kindle version of my book has been available for free this week, Monday through Wednesday. So today is Wednesday, and it is the last day. So if you haven't downloaded your copy, you can go and find that on Amazon. It's called Healing Environment, the Conscious Creation of Health. And it's all about how we can use our bodies as a catalyst to not only heal our bodies, but help to heal the world. So you can find that available now for free today only. So, I said next week we're going to be blending science and spirituality, which I like to do on this program. Today we're going to blend a little bit of spirituality and politics. And for those of you who are out there maybe rolling your eyes thinking, do we have to talk about politics? Yes, we do. And the reason we have to do that is because getting involved, doing something with a sense of passion and purpose, and your purpose doesn't necessarily have to be my purpose, but what we do need is an empowered population. And so whatever that is, I urge you to go out and be active in your community, make the world a better place. Today we are talking about evolution or revolution. And guess what? Revolution is a little bit further down the way if we have a more impassioned and empowered populace. So if we have a group of people out there doing what they love and contributing to our world in a way that brings a deeper sense of peace and joy, then guess what? We can make some better decisions now before we have to make some bad decisions later. So you've seen Baltimore, you've seen Ferguson. If you're in the United States, there is huge uprising. This past Tuesday, Obama was talking about poverty, and he said, we have to have the political and communal will to do something about it. And that's why we can't just keep politics as an intellectual conversation. It has to be a heart-based conversation. So while I will not do every show on this program about politics and spirituality, I will do some of them, and I encourage you to listen. So with that, let me introduce my guest. William T Hathaway began his writing career as a newspaper reporter in San Francisco, then joined the Special Forces to write a book about war. A World of Hurt won a Reinhardt Foundation Award for his portrayal of psychological roots of war, the emotional blockage, and the need for a patriarchal approval that draw men to the military. His other works include Summer Snow, Rip and Burn, Radical Peace, People Refusing War, and Wellsprings of Fable of Consciousness. Today he's on the program, and we are talking about Leela the Revolutionary, a fable for adults about an 8-year-old Indian girl who sparks a world revolution for social justice. Hathaway has a Fulbright professor of creative writing and American studies at universities in Germany, where he currently lives. If you want to check out a selection of his writing, it's available at peacewriter.org. So with that, I feel incredibly honored and blessed to welcome William to the program. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm doing pretty well. I'm still here in Germany. looking at the world from a different perspective outside the collective consciousness of the United States, it looks different than within it.
That's an interesting, how I would like to know, because I think we get so entrenched, and we have, of course, our 24-hour news channels, and that gives us a certain perception of what it's like, not only here in the United States, but what it's like worldwide. So how do you see the world differently?
Well, when I returned to the U.S. several years ago, I spent about a month there. I was appalled that people actually there believe that the United States is under attack. They believe that many people really do actually believe that the United States is threatened by these vicious terrorists who are out to get us. For some reason, these terrorists want to destroy our system. And we have to get them before they get us, because they're like mad dogs who are just interested in conquering the United States and turning it into a Muslim dictatorship or something. And we need to stamp out these terrible people. Outside the U.S., it looks entirely different. Now, there are people outside the U.S. who feel that way also. But outside the U.S., it's much easier to look at history. Now, history is not important in the United States. It's sort of a neglected topic. We don't pay much attention to it. Henry Ford, the great American idol of capitalism, said that, well, history is mainly bunk. And what we want is hard reality. What happened in the past is not so important. But if we look at history, we can see that these people who are attacking us are fighting a defensive war. They're fighting us with the only weapons they have because we're invading them. We're trying to dominate their countries. We're trying to, we throw out their leaders if the leaders don't do what we want. And we will do anything to maintain control over this Middle Eastern oil and their other resources. And we're also invading them with our culture, with our religion, with our economic institutions. And they've gotten sick of it, and they're fighting back. They're fighting back with the only weapons they have. Similar to the way that the American Indians fought back, the Native Americans, at their time, they were considered terrorists too, because they would kill the white invaders any way they could. They would kill the women and the children. Anybody who was white was their enemy because they were on their land. And now we see that differently in the United States. We can see this sort of as heroic freedom fighters. Some of us see it differently. But then they were the terrorists. And now we have a new group of terrorists who are also defending their culture, their way of life, their country, their economics, their religion against a massive aggression from the West that is spearheaded by the United States. The other NATO countries are going along with it, but the impulse comes from the U.S., and so it's quite astounding to be away from the country and then to come back to it and see how much how many people believe the mass media myth that's been created. Especially in my home region, where I grew up just a few miles from where you are now, Angela, in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. And that part of the country is very much sort of isolated, and they really feel that now because they really feel we're fighting for our lives, folks. And they buy the line, and I don't anymore. So that's part of the reason I wrote Leela. Part of the reason I wrote Wellspring's Fable of Consciousness is sort of coming to terms with these things and seeing a different perspective.
Well, I want to talk for a moment about Wellspring's Fable of Consciousness. That was the last time, I can't remember, it was a couple of years ago, and I interviewed you for that book. Yeah. And it is talking about, it's actually set in 2026, and it's there's a battle for the control of the remaining water resources, and it takes place in California. And holy, it's only 2015, but we have, there's reports that California only has 1 year of water left. And so as I'm reading, as soon as I saw that article, I thought of you. And I thought, oh my goodness, it seems like it's coming much faster than 2026. What are your thoughts on it now, looking at what some of the things that are going on, especially in California?
It is coming faster. The whole thing is accelerating towards a real crisis point. We're not there yet, and I think it's going to take the crisis before we really do something about it. But I feel that we can't really save the environment under capitalism. Capitalism can make some reforms here and there, and can do certain things. Capitalism does certain things very well, and it has contributed to the human evolution. It's been a stage in our evolution, and it was certainly better than feudalism. But now, like all these systems, it's running out. It's outliving its usefulness. It needs to be overthrown. It needs to be changed. But in capitalism, it's always profit. If something doesn't make a profit, it doesn't get done. And so the mainstream politicians and mainstream ecologists are trying to figure out, people like Al Gore, for instance, trying to figure out ways that we can make it profitable to help the environment. And they can get a certain degree of mileage out of that, but you can't get at the basic problems if it's based on profit. Everything takes second fiddle to making a corporate profit. So I don't think we can actually do it under capitalism.
Well, I want to bring that up. We're almost actually up on our first break, and I don't want to open up that can of worms right before we go into the break. But it's an interesting conversation about where to go next. Do we evolve? Is it going to cause? Do we need a revolution? All of these sorts of things we're going to talk about when we return here with William T Hathaway on Entanglement Radio with Angela Lebec. We'll be right back.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome to The Gathering Around My Kitchen Table on Equilarium FM, Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join my guests as we integrate spirituality into everyday reality with vibrant conversations, inspired interviews, and my latest channeled guidance to inspire and brighten your day. I'm Claire Johnson, and together we'll be raising vibrations across the nations.
Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Live with Medium Lisa Phoenix, Mediumship Messages and Musings, explores mediumship and all things metaphysical. Lisa Phoenix invites you to reach above and beyond your everyday experiences, to explore new dimensions in the spirit world. She will do live readings to connect callers to their loved ones in spirit, shares engaging stories and teachings from her own personal experience, and will have intriguing conversations with other mediums, spiritual teachers, and healers to help you understand the metaphysical world so you can connect to these forces in your day-to-day life. Join your host on this magical and metaphysical journey into the world of spirit every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
Feed your soul with waves of consciousness on OMTimes Radio.
All right, we are back, and you're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Lebec right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. My guest again today is William T Hathaway, and he is the author of Leela the Revolutionary. So before the break, you were saying that capitalism has sort of run its course here. And in your book, you, Lila, who is only an 8-year-old Indian girl, she actually creates this huge world uprising for social justice, and she works in conjunction with the Socialist Party. Do you feel that is where we need to go as far as a style of government to take us to our next phase of evolution as humans?
Well, socialism has been given a very bad rap.
It certainly has.
Most people think of socialism, and it's been burned into our brains that socialism and communism is just it's some horrible slave state where people lose their freedom, and people are forced into this to live under a dictatorship, and they don't have any say-so about their lives and everything. What that description is really a pretty accurate description of the way we live under capitalism. But we don't perceive it that way, but because we just take it as normal. But what socialism means is that the productive capacity of the world, the resources of the world, the factories, the mines, the agricultural richness belongs to the people, and the people use it to meet human needs and not to make profits for a few owners. Now, the type of communism that we're confronted with in the world was largely, and it was a terrible system. A true socialist does not support what happened in the Soviet Union and in China and in Cuba, because those societies, one thing, they were under total attack from the West, from the capitalist countries, at the beginnings of the revolution. And the revolution took a really sick course, partially as a defense against the attacks from the West. The 5 Western countries, the major Western countries, sent in troops into Russia right after the revolution to try to overthrow it, and supported a civil war there to try to overthrow it. And then after that, maintained economic warfare for 70 years until they did eventually destroy the system. But on its own, it became a terrible system because of the cultures there. The culture in Russia, the culture in China, and the culture in Cuba were totalitarian cultures. And so naturally, they reached for the strong man who would give orders and everybody follows them, a very top-down dictatorial system. With our tradition of libertarianism, of individual freedom and democracy, we can build a much better kind of socialism, a kind of socialism that's grounded from the ground up, that's rooted in economic democracy. And there's very strong streams of this within the socialist movement. Rosa Luxemburg and Trotsky, this is what they were working for. But it got perverted by Stalin, who wanted to build up his own personal power, and who was a nationalist, and who also a maniac, who created a really miserable system that got exported. So we need to revamp socialism and give it a Western libertarian emphasis. By libertarian, I mean we want to reduce the pressures, the external pressures that people are under, so they have the maximum liberty themselves. In the U.S., it's often taken to mean, well, we want to get rid of government. And the U.S. government seems to be the enemy, because the government is the instrument of capitalism. The government just exists to administer capitalism in the U.S. Therefore, it seems like an oppressive force. But if the government was administering a decent system where people worked together and shared the benefits of their labor and didn't have to make profits for this owner class, be an entirely different kind of government. And it's not going to be easy to build that.
Well,
but that's what I'm aiming at.
So there's a few things, first of all, I see sort of a major PR issue because as you talk about socialism, right, it has been so, as you mentioned, it's that word has been very tainted. It has been so, even as I hear the word socialism, and it gets caught up with, like you said, our government system. When I think about that, I think I don't want, especially the way that the government is now. I have a very serious distrust for the government, especially because of this, the special interests and the power that the corporations have. And I appreciate what you're saying, but as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how do we get that system if the government is how it is right now? How do we infuse that system with some of those ideals some of those more socialist ideals? I almost think that we need to create a different name for it than socialism because, like I said, it's a bit of a PR nightmare because nobody, if you listen to any of the talk radio here or, Fox News or anything like that, socialism is almost a swear word. It is.
Yeah. It's become, the media has managed to twist that word into its opposite. And the media is very good at things like that. It's also been able to twist war and peace into their opposites. We're supposedly feel that we're fighting for peace in the world, but in fact the United States is not fighting for peace at all. It's fighting for domination, as it has to under capitalism. Capitalism is either dominate or go under, and I don't think it's going to work to infuse any ideals, because the people running the show have their own ideals, and what I think can help is a sense of entanglement that I think we need to expand on this idea of entanglement and apply that to some of our social thinking. Now, you know a lot more about this than I do. So, Angela, maybe you could explain entanglement from the quantum physics point of view, and then I'll try to apply it to politics and to Lila's story. How we're all entanglement being, we're all interconnected, and there's a certain level of creation where these differences disappear. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, I I've got to say my background isn't in physics, but I liked the word entanglement. And when you go back, and it's what Einstein called the spooky action at a distance, that you could have create an action on, say, an atomic level in one area, and you would see, even though they weren't connected physically, you could see on another atomic level that action across the distance. So even though you're only affecting one thing, if you look at it, even though they weren't touching physically, you could still see the action created against the molecule or an atom that wasn't even remotely close. And that's the premise, is that what I wanted to do with the station and why I called it Entanglement Radio is that it is connected, that when you throw that ripple or throw that stone in the pond, you do create that ripple, and you don't even know how that goes and affects people who are not immediately in your vicinity, how they hear you, for example, across the radio and this conversation and what that triggers in them, and taking that idea and spreading it out. And I like that. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, is that lots of people, when they hear the word socialism too, they think that it's atheist, that there is no sense of heart in it. And I think in order for it to work, it has to be completely about heart. What are your thoughts on that?
It does, yeah. But capitalism shrinks our hearts. And capitalism, where entanglement says, hey, we're all basically the same thing, that there really, these differences between us are on the surface, but the deeper reality is we're all unified. We're all one thing, and that thing is of course a spiritual thing. You could say that thing is the whole manifestation of divine energy, or the unified field, according to quantum physics, or the Atma, the great self, the one self that is the whole universe, a conscious being, a divine conscious being, the universe. But the economic system we live in denies this togetherness. It's based on separation. It's based on me against you, fighting it out. It doesn't need to be that way. We look at it that way because we're creatures of this system. Our personalities are very heavily influenced by the economic system that we live in, the assumptions we make about the world and who we are and what reality is are shaped by this competitive, hyper-individualistic, very materialistic, very aggressive system called capitalism.
Yes.
And we need to get rid of that, and ideals aren't going to do it. Infusing ideals into society, I don't think. It can help. The ideals can help us make the revolution as nonviolent as possible, and I think that's very important. But it's quite likely at some point we're going to have to fight, because to really make the changes, we're going to have to take the property away from the capitalist class. And property is their life. It's our reality. It's based on, in these people's minds, they live property, and they totally believe it's theirs. And we go up to them and say, this corporation is not really yours. The money, the fortunes you have created were generated by the labor power you exploited from your workers and gradually accumulated this capital. They think that's nonsense, and they say, "Hey, that's crazy."
We're up on our break, so that's another big can of worms that I want to talk about when we return here. We're talking with William T Hathaway, and you're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque right here on OMTimes Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
All right, we are back, and you're listening to Entanglement Radio with Angela Lebec right here on OMTimes Radio Network. My guest today is William T Hathaway, and he is the author of many books, but the one that we are talking about today is Leela the Revolutionary. So I want to talk about, violence, and you said that at some point we're probably going to have to get much more aggressive in our tactics to take our power back. But before we get there, I want to talk, because I think this will lead to that conversation. In your book, Lila, the protagonist of the story is actually an 8-year-old Indian girl. Why did you choose that particular, instead of it being a man or even an adult for that matter, why did you choose an 8-year-old Indian girl?
Well, I was appalled by capitalism, by how aggressive and pervasive capitalism has become, how it's become a global madness. And in a moment of despair, I saw all these predatory men and women in their dark suits commanding us, marching us resolutely towards war and poverty. The politicians, the corporate leaders, they're so powerful and they're so blind and they're everywhere. And in my despair, what's the way out of this? How can we overthrow this murderous system? And then a phrase from the Bible came to me. A little child shall lead them. Now, the idea of a child leading a revolution was so far-fetched that I knew there must be something to it. We adults haven't managed it so well, so maybe a child. But then I wondered, well, what kind of a child could lead a revolution? And a little girl popped into my mind and said, me. And I said, well, what's your name? Leela. How old are you? I'm 8. Well, how are you going to lead the revolution? I'll tell you about it. And she did. So it was like she just came to me and said, this is the way we're going to do it. And she was, no one ever told her that she couldn't end poverty and inequality. So she didn't doubt that she could just do it. Just, the Nike, the Nike ad. Well, she works in a Nike shoe factory. And so she applied this idea of just do it to taking over the factory. Saying, okay, it's ours. We make the shoes. We make this stuff. You just make the profit. So now it belongs to us. And that sort of started the whole thing. It's not a story for children at all, but it has some of those qualities. It's sort of like, the story, The Emperor's New Clothes, where the little boy can see that the emperor is really naked, instead of just wearing, everybody else has been convinced that the emperor's wearing his great new clothes, and the little boy's saying, well, he's naked. Now, Lila can see the reality that adults are blind to. She can see the oppression, and she doesn't like it, and she's not shy about pointing it out. So I see the book as a call to action. If this little 8-year-old girl can do it, well, then we can too. I wrote it to convince us that a better world really is possible, and we're the ones to create it. Basically, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing that having an 8-year-old as the protagonist of the story is that you're right. It makes you realize just how entrenched we are in our conditioning. Because there's one part where she is negotiating with some of the owners of the factories, and they're like, well, we can't do that. We can't do that. But this little girl is crazy. And you forget that so often we're trying to create that change from within the system, and we're using those same confines that are inherent in those systems to guide our behavior. And what we're talking about needs to be on the outside of that system, because otherwise we're just going to be taking these little Band-Aid approaches, and we're going to realize that those aren't going to hold in the long run.
They don't. It would be nice if they did. This idea of reformism is very appealing, and of changing the system from within it and avoiding all the unpleasantness of revolution and evolving towards a better system. It sounds very nice, and it's been tried ever since the late 19th century. It hasn't worked. The reforms don't hold. Like, they may hold for a little while, like I say with the Band-Aid. At the beginning, they did improve a few conditions. Social Security helped to stave off the worst of poverty and old age, and Medicare helped some. And in the 50s and through the 70s, the unions were able to force through higher wages in North America and in Europe. But now these reforms, these hard-fought reforms that were resisted very much at the time, they're being reversed because capitalism needs to reduce prices. The Western industrial forces need to reduce their prices if they're going to compete with the emerging powers like China and India. This past period that we're just coming out of now, that some of us actually grew up in, and now we're seeing an end, this period of liberal prosperity was a feature of the Keynesian phase of capitalism. This was a 30-year bubble of better wages in North America and Europe. It was necessary because it stimulated consumer demand. The corporations could afford to pay more, to pay decent wages, to have benefits, because that stimulated consumption, because the market was in the home country. That's gone now. It's not going to return into the system. The world market is now more important than the home country, and selling there requires low prices, which in turn requires cheap labor. So we're being forced down. The working people in the West are being forced down to this level of their competing countries. We're not there yet. It's happening gradually. But the corporations have already lowered wages to the point where young workers are earning less than their parents did now. Mm-hmm. And that's aside from not inflation, just straight dollars. This is now the consolidation phase of capitalism, where global competition eliminates the less effective predators and the wealth concentrates in fewer and fewer giant corporations, and the rest of us just become their vassals. And this system is not based on greed. It's not just greedy managers and stuff. The system requires it. Slashing the wages of their employees now is the only way these corporations can maintain their dominance. Under capitalism, it's either dominate or go under, because it's a dog-eat-dog, one man against the world sort of approach, and it's that mentality. It's what creates that mentality, and it's so many of our myths, the myths of the Wild West and everything, where you are now and where I grew up, is based on this myth of the lone hero doing it, this fractionalized person getting out there and bending the world to his or her will. But that's a myth. And it's also a myth that capitalism can produce prosperity. It does in certain situations, but globally it doesn't. It depends on the exploitation of workers at some point in the chain.
And the environment.
And the environment, yeah, very much so.
What I wanted to, yesterday I was listening to the radio, and Seattle in the United States, they have decided that they are going to, within the next 2 years, they're going to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So I was listening to a conservative talk radio show, and they were saying that so many, especially in the service industry, so many restaurant owners are coming up and saying, I'm going to have to lay these people off or tighten up their hours, give them less hours. I might have to close a store, increase prices. And I think that that's just an example of what we're talking about, as if when you try and change something within a system that doesn't support that action, for example, in an intellectual way, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is fantastic, except for it's within a system that doesn't allow for that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. There's getting less and less free room to do that. That used to be possible, that the workers, and pretty well through the 50s and 70s, wages went up because of the pressure of workers. And it was easier because that money would get recycled back into the economy. But now the pressures have increased so much in this consolidation phase that the little restaurants are being put out of business by the big chains, and the big chains are eating each other now. And this builds. It is a form of evolution now. The title of our talk this evening, Evolution versus Revolution. The two things are connected, and evolution works for a certain period. There's a wonderful book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, about this Thomas Kuhn, talking about the paradigm shift, where in science and in other complex systems of thought and economic organization, things progress, things evolve for a period until they can't evolve anymore within the confines of the system, either within the thought structures in science or within the economic structures. And then something has to give. A new paradigm comes in, a new form, and that's a revolution. It happens suddenly. It's often violent. But if we do this with as much conscious centeredness as we can, and realizing the sanctity of human life, and trying to instill that in our actions, we can minimize the violence. But a totally nonviolent revolution isn't very likely. The people that are praised as being nonviolent heroes, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, there's another side to that gets ignored. These people would not have been effective if there hadn't have been the threat, in some cases the actual violence going on by other people. Both Gandhi and the militant rebels there in India were required to convince the British to free the country. And both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were required to convince the U.S. Congress to end segregation. If it had just been Martin Luther King, he wouldn't have got it. It needs that other side too. It needs that pressure from the other side saying, okay, this is the peaceful, you can have it either the peaceful way or we're going to fight you. And now most people aren't ready for that. And it's certainly be premature now to start fight. By no means is violence now is really pointless. But we need to have about a 50-year perspective on this, of organizing people who have a clear vision of the kind of society they want to create and what it's going to take to do it, and as peacefully, and as the conditions worsen, as they are worsening, then we can build towards a mass movement that can then overthrow the system. Now we can't do it.
Well, I want to
prepare for it.
I want to talk more about that. You said you wrote Leela as a call to action. Well, that's what I want to talk about more when we return here with William T Hathaway on Entanglement Radio with Angela Levesque. We will be right back after this break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Imagine receiving healing, vibration-raising energy as you listen to the radio. Energy that flows effortlessly to you. Imagine exploring all things metaphysical, sharing in an ongoing adventure. Join me, Karen Smoot, along with my co-hosts Lisa Victorson and Wendy Weber for Immersion into Source every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on OM Radio.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Simone Milasas would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com.
Know what to do, just can't figure out how to fit it all into your busy life? It doesn't have to be that way. Hi, I'm Ellen Baisberg from Seamless Life. Join me every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio and learn the how of conscious living. Let me and my guests help make your life seamless.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back to Entanglement Radio with Angela Lebec right here on the OMTimes Radio Network. We are here in the final segment with author William T Hathaway, and we are talking about the subject of his book, Leela the Revolutionary, which is a fable for adults about an 8-year-old Indian girl who sparks a world revolution for social justice. This segment of the program is brought to you by Hestia Health. This is where we bring it on home, and Hestia was all about creating getting the center of yourself together before going out and spreading your flame in the world. So if you want to check out more, you can go to hestiahealth.com, creating calm minds, open hearts, inspired lives. So you were saying before the break that we need to get together like a 50-year plan. And I think that is overwhelmingly one of humans' downfalls, is that we don't look enough into the future, that we're constantly, like I said, just putting on Band-Aids here, putting on Band-Aids there, just small increments on top of one another. And I think that there is this lack of clear vision. So I want to spend the next little bit talking about, in your opinion, you said Lila was a call to action. What would this 50-year plan look like?
Well, it needs to be international for one thing, and that's why the book has an international setting. It ends up in the United States, but it starts out in sort of an unnamed country in South Asia, and it's so we need to connect to the worstly exploited people who aren't in the West. The very worstly exploited are in these extremely poor countries, and the people there do things. They grow crops, they mine, that they get dig natural resources out of the earth. They cut down trees and sell lumber. They do all sorts of things that most of them work very hard and are barely able to stay alive. And that's interesting. They're creating great value in these countries by what they do, the food that they grow that we all eat, and the natural resources that then get shipped to the industrial countries to make the stuff that we use. They're creating this value at its roots. They're barely staying alive. And even here in the countries, in the industrial countries, we have a massive underclass that's growing regularly, of people who are scrambling, whose whole lives are spent just in trying to get enough money to eat and feed the kids and to have a halfway decent life. And most of us here, most of us listening, are more privileged than that. We don't need to do that, and so we can sort of lose perspective on the prosperity, the money that's flowing around that we use and that other people accumulate to make fortunes is created by the labor of these people or by their lack of labor, because a huge mass of unemployed people is necessary to keep wages down, because it prevents people from unifying and saying, we're taking it over now. We make this stuff, now we're going to benefit from it because we're turned against one another. There's always needs to be people out there who will take, if you go on strike, somebody's going to take your job. Somebody who's even more desperate than you is going to take your job. And that's a great factor in splitting the working class. We're split geographically by having the worst in these countries, that the Western governments keep vicious dictators in power in these countries. Most of the foreign aid that our tax money goes to is invested in keeping really vicious dictators dominating these countries so that people can't have any other choice except to do these miserable jobs for basically subsistence wages, because that's generating the profits.
So what do you expect there? What do you suggest that for people, and actually this is a fairly worldwide audience, because that's one of the cool things about OMTimes is that it does it reaches across the globe, and they've made it so that anybody can listen to this. They don't need an app or anything. They can listen to the program, which is awesome. So what can people do that are listening to this program? What do you think their next step is to help contribute to this shift towards social justice?
We've got to come together as a conscious working class and realize that we've been divided, not just geographically, but we've also been divided within our cultures by gender, by age, by social stratification. We've been presented with an array of classes that we're supposed to fit into: the upper middle class, and the middle class, the lower middle class. That's done to conceal the fact that basically there are two classes. They're the working class and the owning class. And almost all of us are in the working class, but that has a bad name. That's not cool to be in the working class. The working class are these poor people out there that we might feel sorry for, but we certainly wouldn't identify with them. So we need to come together as a class. We need to heal the wounds, these separations, the separations by gender, the imbalance of power between men and women, the oppression of homosexuals, and the racial segregation, the bigotry that the system enforces to separate the poor people from each other so they're fighting one another. The most vicious white racists are the poor whites. and that's done. That is generated. The culture generates that because those are the two most dangerous groups. If the poor whites and the poor blacks got together, the poor whites, the poor blacks, and the poor Mexicans got together, that would be dangerous. We can't have that. So we've got bigotry being fomented by the culture. So we need to heal these wounds. We need to heal these divisions and get to know one another and work together and realize we have a common interest. We're dependent on one another and start fighting together small battles like the $15 in Seattle. The party that I'm a member of, the Freedom Socialist Party, has their main offices in Seattle, and they've been active in this campaign. They're also, one of their emphasis is on healing the divisions along gender lines between people, the homophobia, the sexism, and the racism that has split the working class and rendered it basically incapable of confronting the ruling class. And so we need to come together and get to know one another, fight the small battles, and very important, the readers here have a wonderful spiritual gift, a wonderful gift of consciousness to share in this, to give it a gentle side to it, so it doesn't become mere angry shouting and violence. So it's imbued with a sense of spirit, and that's a big job.
It is a big job.
It is not going to happen though, unless things continue to get worse. Things are the external, the objective conditions will have to continue to decline, and that's going to happen as NATO, particularly the United States, begins to lose this war for dominating Mideast oil. That's why they're fighting so desperately. That's why we're almost broke, is because the rulers know if they lose domination of Mideast oil and those resources, then they're in for a major decline. Then the only way they can continue to extract their profits is by cracking down even harder on their workers in their country. And brother, when that happens, that's going to be the objective condition for revolution, when they start cracking down even harder on us than they are now. Then if we have this base built up of a unified, integrated working class, then we can do it. And we're going to need to then, because things will probably get worse. And as they do, we need to be ready for it with a strong, united, loving working class.
I like that. Well, we have to end there because we only have a couple of minutes left, but a strong, united, loving. I like that you put the loving in there, working class. So how do people find out more about your books and your writing and all of that information?
As you mentioned at the beginning, the website the publisher set up about my work is peacewriter.org, www.peacewriter.org. .org, O-R-G, one word, Peace Writer. And there's if you do an internet search for Lila, L-I-L-A, Leela the Revolutionary, you'll come up with information on the book. If you want to, you can also Google the Freedom Socialist Party and see what they have to offer. It might be surprising what some of their approach to socialism is entirely different than what you might be expecting.
Because it definitely needs a rebranding.
Yeah, it needs a rebranding.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I think we just had a really fascinating conversation. And as I said in my monologue, that we need to talk about this stuff. Some people I know who are very spiritually minded like to kind of put their blinders on, and they're like, no, I don't want to hear about this stuff. But I think it's really important to have these conversations. So I want to thank you so much for being on the program today.
I enjoyed it very much, Angela.
All right. Well, coming up next week, we have NASA engineer David Gagan, and he wrote a book called The Endless Journey, a unique perspective on mankind's origin, purpose, and ultimate destiny. So we will be lifting the veil next week with David Gagan. Coming up next on the OMTimes Radio Network is Equilibrium FM with Claire Johnson, and she is talking about the goddess within loves to laugh and sing. I just want to remind my listeners that today is the last day. If you want to download the Kindle version of my book, Healing Environment, The Conscious Creation of Health, for free, you can find that on Amazon.com. And so download it today, because today is the last day. You can hear me live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern right here on IOM.FM. And you can find out more about myself and my services going to HestiaHealth.com. You can also find me on Facebook and on Twitter at Hestia Health and Entanglement Radio. This is Angela Levesque wishing you love and light. I will see you next week. Thank you.